Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I'd like to again thank Nessa for facilitating this and thank Green Foundation Ireland for having me here today. I'd like to send my apologies on behalf of Martin Ferris, who is our TD and our main spokesperson on agriculture and food. He couldn't be here, so hopefully I can fill his boots appropriately. I was struck by something that Seamus mentioned earlier in terms of the importance of this conference, and that this issue shouldn't be something that we leave to pre-election sound bites, or, for example, the importance of the agri-food sector. It shouldn't just be something that comes up in a cyclical pattern. It is a dominant issue, and it should be there on the political, the social, the economic agenda at all times, and that's why this is timely. And I do, again, thank you for having me here. Just following on from something that Trevor mentioned and the story he was telling, and looking into the future. I have a cousin. She's 26 years of age. At the moment she's living in Edinburgh. She's bumming around essentially, and she changes her mind often about what she wants to do with her life, where she wants to go, jobs, careers, things like that. But she knows one thing for sure, and she's always been a big fan of sustainable living. And she said, "I don't care about a house. It doesn't bother me at all. I'd live in a caravan. I just want to have a field or a couple of fields, grow my own food, and be able to support myself in that way." And I think it's some people get annoyed listening to her, but I think it's really inspiring that this is what she wants: sustainable living. So, just dealing with the issue at hand, we all know there is an economic and indeed a social aspect to food, especially given the current situation that we're in, and the economic and financial crisis, and all that comes with that in terms of jobs, emigration and so on, and indeed the impact that has on rural communities. I'm not going to try and make any political points today, but I am going to try and examine the potential for developing the Indigenous food sector and how we can help to maybe revitalise communities and employment opportunities. First of all, I'm going to try and put the problems and the opportunities confronting the food sector in the context of the overall scenario in which the food sector is currently operating. I know it has been mentioned earlier, and we're all aware here today in terms of the arrangements that are being put in place in terms of farm payment scheme under the reformed CAP, and that is going to have an enormous long-term implication for farmers and indeed the Irish food sector overall, which includes direct producers, those who work in processing, and indeed consumers. Now, Sinn Féin did make a submission to the consultation process that's taking place with the Department of Agriculture and Minister Coveney, and on the decision that he's going to, or the model that he's going to base the new payment scheme, as well as in relation to the new environmental schemes and funding to boost the entry of new farmers or of younger farmers. So we believe, and it's a very contentious area, but I'm going to go into it anyway, and I know Eddie will be discussing it later on. So we believe that the current scheme as is quite unfair. Just over 2,000 recipients are on an annual single farm payment of €50,000 and more, and that includes around 200 who receive more than €100,000, and many of that wouldn't be productive farmers but businesses that will be connected to farming. And along the western seaboard, for example, you can actually count the number of individuals in the upper categories around several dozen. And in County Leitrim, for example, there's just one recipient of more than €75,000 and hundreds of farmers there who don't actually receive any payment at all. So we have proposed that some agri-businesses and others such as golf courses shouldn't actually receive payments under the new scheme. The of the current payments is also highlighted with the fact that those 2,000 on the higher payments receive more in a year than 52,000 on the single farm payment of 5,000 and less per year. And when these statistics were actually highlighted by Deputy Ferris to Minister Coveney in the Dáil last week, he agreed that they were actually unjustifiable. And he did promise that under the new arrangement, no farmer would receive less than 60% of the current average per hectare payment. So that would mean a substantial increase for some farmers at the lower end of the scale, but it is less of a redistribution than I think many people that are involved in farming would like to see. Although the main farming bodies have defended in the large the existing payment scheme, I think some of their members, particularly in those western counties that I mentioned earlier, are unhappy with that. Some have defended the higher payments and opposed redistribution on the basis that it would discourage more productive farmers, while some have challenged that by pointing to the fact there's actually in fact little difference in livestock density between those on and around the average per hectare payment and those on 5 times that average. Now, where that is relevant to what we're discussing here today, I suppose it refers back to what Trevor mentioned in terms of viability and going back to the local food sector, is that unless lower income farm households have a means to increase their income, and a significant part of that needs to be support from direct payments, there are going to be fewer and fewer people actually producing the food that we're talking about into the future. So some prognosis for the Irish food sector foresee a situation that there might be fewer producers with the demise of family farming. And that in itself has huge implications not only for the future of farming or the nature of farming socially but culturally. It also has problems in terms of food security. I suppose it's all very well talking about having a large export market, but if localities and countries do become dependent on imported food, that can present dangers in itself for the future. And the way to ensure the security is to have more localised food production, rather than as the situation where someone claimed that the average distance that a food product travels to a table is, I think, 1,500 kilometres. We don't want that. So it is important, therefore, to ensure that direct payment system under CAP does provide that basic level of income security to ensure that survival. Now, Food Harvest 2020 does outline the Department's vision for developing the food sector. It's one of maximising the returns from the production of high quality, safe and naturally produced food, and that can optimise Ireland's already existing reputation as the origin of high quality food. And you know, we say that it's very much sought after from abroad. In combination with that, in what it terms a smarter approach based on higher value output, better and more targeted marketing, and better educated producers and consumers. Now, it is a good vision, we wouldn't doubt that, but the reality is very different from what's, I suppose the reality is that much of what's going on in the economy at the minute is kind of mitigating against that, which is the problem. I suppose apart from the overall situation in terms of cutbacks and the austerity, the food sector is also coming up against challenges in terms of primary producers, ranging from debt, the dominance of processors and retailers in the market, which does in itself apply pressures on the prices producers receive for their produce. Now, with increasing emigration and a rising age profile of farmers in the West in particular, the danger is that if these current trends continue, there are going to be very few farmers in some parts of the country, and therefore there will be no actual producers to produce the food. I suppose just my last point, and it was touched on the last session, and it's just something that I have been interested in. We do obviously have threats to the overall image of the Irish food sector, and that was touched on in terms of the horse meat scandal. But traceability and labelling are very big issues, and that is a potential threat to, for example, labelling or to exports and thousands of jobs. So regulations around traceability and labelling need to be strengthened to ensure that such a situation doesn't occur. So when we talk about how will food be produced in 2020, without looking at the information we have about food production, its origins, it's very hard to see that. So we do need to address, looking at food production in 2020, we need to address, for example, the credence characteristics of food. Currently, rules relating to labelling aren't structured to account for market failures arising from this, and that, you know, that goes back to different things like, you know, the smoked Irish salmon, Irish smoked salmon, things like that. Substantial transformation, it's an issue that we're all aware of, and more these will become important to the consumer. And I think it's very important that we do look at those issues into the future. I'm very aware that I have limited time left, so I'm sure that there'll be plenty of questions and answers, or questions to be asked, and there'll be a round table later on. I'll be happy to address more issues. But as I said, looking at the viability, it's important making sure that the distance that food is travelling, especially in terms of the costs of oil into the future, these are going to be very important issues. So thank you very much again for having me, and I hope I've started the debate for the other contributors. Thank you.